Hello and welcome to another Svelte Kit tutorial in combination with SQLite, and today I want to show you how we can implement AG-Grid. AG-Grid is this component that offers a spreadsheet-like editing experience for any data, and we're gonna implement it into our music app. If you don't know it or you haven't watched any other tutorials, check out the playlist in the comments, and we can go on an album here. We see these tracks. Now we can edit tracks and we get this AG-Grid, and I can navigate it via keyboard like in Excel. Can say add here some numbers, save changes, voila, it's updated in the database. I can add rows, new track, and select some values here, save changes. See the ID updated, it's really an insert, and I can of course also delete it again. So have fun, and I hope you like the tutorial. Thanks. So we're back in our little demo app. That's, if you don't know what this app is, I've basically built this in the last few SQLite with SvelteKit tutorials. So if you want to know how this all works, make sure to check the tutorials out. I'm gonna put the playlist in the description. But in here we have basically some music tracks and albums, and I can get on this album edit page and we get this track list. So basically a table with all the tracks. And I think it makes sense to use the AG-Grid plugin on the track list so we can edit the track table. And for that, I'm gonna add an edit button here first. So I go back to my code, and in here I have this this Svelte file. I already have this section here that's only shown if the admin is in there. Just gonna add a link here, href to album, ID of the album, and then edit tracks as a new site. And already created the folder here. So let's put a Svelte file in there and just first start off with tracks XYZ. And if we click it, we get to that grade. So it of course should not be XYZ, but we need to load the data page.server.ts, and let's just copy the load function from the album page because we get all the album parameters in there. So let's do that. Error, oh, not that error. Okay, nice. It's also here I added this as admin so we can show something, but the whole page should not load if the user is not admin. So we can do this here. If not, local root and admin, we can throw error 404. I think I'm going to disable Copilot here and say unauthorized. Disable Copilot. Okay, it should now be disabled, I guess. And great, so we first get the albums and we can then go in here and load our data. So nice, and then we can say data.album.album title. And let's also make this a little bit nicer. This is Balmer, if you're wondering, the CSS framework. Tracks for, and also add some padding to the sides so it's not crammed to the left that much. Yeah, it's really big, but I don't care. And so this is our starting point, and we want to make the tracks editable here. So first off, I'm gonna go to our database file, and we have already get album tracks, and I think it makes sense that we allow for editing some data in there, some more columns than just the one we did previously. So let's go there and add some columns to the query. Here I joined genres, so we can select the genre or change the genre, and also the composer. And also we have to change the type with the new values, so we add the 2 fields. Great. And so we can go ahead and start off with importing and loading the AG grid. So to do this, we first need to actually install AG grid, and I'm gonna do this. I need to copy the install script. So I'm using yarn. You can also do npm, but I'm installing it as a dev dependency because it will be built and included into the Svelte app. We don't need it on the server to run it in production. And I'm to install AG-Grid community that includes all packages, or all the free community packages. There's also enterprise. And now that it's installed, great, we can go ahead and actually import it. So let's do that. For that, we have to import first the grid, but we cannot use it until we mount the page, so it's client-side rendered. We can't render the grid on the server. We need to do it on the client, so we have to use onMount. And on mount, we can then go ahead and also access the document. So also let's hook the grid into, or let's provide a div for it. So here is a div. I gave it the ID myGrid, a height and a width, and also a theme class. This is the minimal theme of it. And then we can go ahead and get this div we created here. We get it by ID. And to make sure we're type safe, we first check if we actually found it. And then let's do a grid variable of type grid, and grid equals new grid. Then we have to pass the element and also some options, so grid options. So these we have to define also, so let's do it here. These don't change, so we can do it beforehand. And for that, I'm gonna also make a type safe, load the type. And we start off with default, we have to define our columns in here, so AG-Grid really does know what we want to actually do there. So we can go ahead and say, okay, these are default def, we can sort it, we can filter a column. Flex means that they use the whole width. You can also resize them, and they're editable per default. And then we can actually define the columns. So I'm gonna make an array here. And so we say for each of our columns we return field. This is the JavaScript accessor, so track ID. Let's actually use multi edit power and go ahead and say, okay, this is an object, and we have the field as a string, and add commas. Great. So now we can give a header name, so it's not the same ID, and so these automatically get applied to each one. But let's say the ID should not be editable, because we need that in the to save the data later. Track name, header name equals tracks, and next one is this, next one is composer, and the last one is genre. And I missed a comma. Great. The last thing we can add to our data is, to our config or the grid options, is the actual data property. So we say raw data equals our track data. And if I've made no mistakes, I've got logged out. So let's log in again and great. Now we're back, and let's go to our album and edit tracks. And oh yeah, I forgot to import CSS, I guess. So go back to our code, and I made some changes to the session that it's saved in the database also. But let's go to our page. Where am I? Here am I. So we need to still import actually the CSS of our AG grid, and it's the first one is the default styles, so that make the table look like a table, and then there are themes that you can pick from. I'm gonna use the Alpine theme, also edit the class here, AG theme Alpine, because this looks very basic and minimalistic, you could say, I guess. So wow, and we're back, and as you can see, we have a grid here now. We can resize, we can filter, great, sort. Oh, we can actually remove the filter. Yeah, and so that's good. And so the thing is here, composers may be a little bit too small, and genre, I think it would be better if we have a select list for this one. So let's go ahead and go back to our code. And one of the features of AG Grid are specific cell editors. So for example, for composer, we can say we want large text cell editor. And you can see this is now a big pop-up. And for the genres, we can use a select list. But the thing is, we first need to actually go ahead and get the all available genres. So we need to edit our DB file. Copilot is still enabled somehow, I guess. And the genres we can get with this function. It's very simple. SQL, select genre ID and name from genres. And of course we need to add a type. So here is the genre type. And okay, let's go ahead back to our server file. We can then go here and say we also want the genres. Get genres. And also return them. So because this is, we get ID and name, we need to map it so that we actually only get the name. So as far as I know, the select lists from the AG grid only get an array of strings. so you can't say ID and display value. So we have to map it. So let's say const genre array equals data dot genres dot map, and from every genre we also only want to return the name, so we get a flat array of only the name strings. And then we can go to this here and we say cell editor is AG select cell editor, and we say cell editor params, and we say values equal to the genre array. Great. And go back to our page. I think it already reloaded. Yeah, as you can see, if you double click now in here, we get a nice pop-up. Great. Also, cool thing about AGGrid is we can navigate with keyboard, and that's also great. And another small thing that that I think makes sense is this duration field here. Numbers should be right aligned. So let's go ahead and here we can add a type. Types are also some basically some properties of columns. You can define your own, or this one numeric column comes from AGGrid. And what this does is it automatically aligns header and value to the right side for the display thing. And another cool thing is we can do value formatters. So yeah, we say this is milliseconds. It may be sense to edit them as milliseconds, but to show them as seconds. So let's go ahead and say only say duration, and we can add a property called value formatter, and this is a sum function. Get params, and we return params dot value, and if there is a value we return params value 2000, or we return nothing. And okay, so TypeScript says it's wrong. Okay, what is the number, I guess? Can I say undefined? No, I can't. It's not a temperature string. Okay, do I have to actually... Oh. I have to return a string, so... This and this. Yeah, okay, this looks better. And so we now get here seconds. And the dot is only here in the editing. So I can still, it's not in the editing, it's only displayed, so the dot doesn't get in no way when editing the value. And I think that's good. Great. So I guess the next step would be to make us be able to add rows. So currently we can update, but maybe you want to add a track, and that's also pretty straightforward. So let's go ahead and back to our code here into the app. And in here we can go to this section here, and I think we might add a button to the side of it. So I'm gonna create a div around it, and I'm gonna use the columns feature of Bulma. So it's a 12 grid, and we say 10 of the 12 grid places is for the grid itself. We also then can't say width 100%. And then we add another column, and in there a button class equals button, and we say it's add row, and have a look, and that's great. Of course, it doesn't do anything for now. And to change that, we can create a new function called function handle add row. Takes no arguments, and first off we want to create a new row, and we can do that by simply saying track ID, let's say anything, and track name, and track so it's basically the same fields as our data has, so also the fields. And last, the genre. And so we have a new object of row. And what we can do with that is we go to grid options. And we first defined it as only our config, but it's actually getting expanded, this object, when we create a new grid. So we can now say API, and we say apply transaction. So we can add the new row, and we want it on the bottom. So the bottom, we can find out how many rows we have by doing this. Grid options API get displayed row count. We have to check if it's not empty. And we can then go ahead and say add index with row count. And then we can actually already call this handle add row. On click handle add row. And let's find out. So we can see a scroll bar is added, and we get our entry here with 999 in the composer. And we could go ahead and edit this. So what I also want to do is currently, if we look at the HTML of a row, we see here we get comp ID. Let me make this bigger. And so no, this is not comp. I don't mean comp ID. I mean here row index. And index is here row ID. I mean, so row index is just, it's the first row, so 1, but we also get here row ID, and these are different from the actual IDs we have from the database, and I think we should use them. So we can do that in a simple way by going to our grid options. So the object, and maybe below here, we can make a function called getRowID, and we return, or we get params.data, and return the track ID. And if we now have a look at this row, we get row ID 6, the same as we defined from, or we got from the database. That's great. And another thing I want to do in this add row thing is we need to scroll down there now. So that's not so cool, I guess. Maybe we should focus this automatically and scroll to it. I like to do it with a set timeout first. So we let the page render the new data first. So let's go in here, and we first so we can call set focused cell, but we first want to ensure that the first column in the row is visible. So we're gonna grab the first column of our columns. So grid options, column API, get all displayed columns and the first one. And then we make sure that it's visible, so it would scroll horizontally. And now we want to make sure our new inserted row is visible vertically, so ensure index visible our row count. And at last we say set focused cell. The row is row count or the index of the row, and column is the first column. So add row, and voila, we are exactly here now. And of course this also works for new ones. So you can now see it's a little bit bugged out here. And if we open the console, we also see, we have created multiple nodes with the ID 999. And that's not good, so we need to change this at least here. So let's maybe get the max ID we have currently have. So max ID equals 0. And we can then iterate through every node for each node. And we get row node. And just a small if the current is bigger as our max, we set it to the max, and in the end we get the highest max ID. And we can then say max ID +1. And we also add this to nothing and this to undefined. This makes more sense. And if we go back here, refresh, we get 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, etc. So this works great. And the next step is also to allow to delete rows. And for that, I think a good option is to let users select the rows and click delete rows on the right side here. And so let's jump back into our code. And we're here. And we can make some settings first, so the users can actually select rows. And we go to the first field here, and we can add following thing, checkbox selection true. And then here is a checkbox. But for now, you can only select a single row. We can also add another property here, row selection multiple. So now I can actually select more than one. And now we need to also implement the button to delete the rows. And for that, I gonna paste again a new button and also added some divs in here. So I don't need to so the divs here, because then there are new lines here. And grid is not rendering because we have an error. We need to define the function delete, function handle delete, again no parameters. And this time we're gonna grab the selected rows. We have grid options API get selected rows. Then we just get an array with the data. And we can then go ahead again, apply a transaction like before. This time we call remove unselected row data. And additionally, I think it's best, because we need to delete them also on the server, of course. I think we should also save which IDs we deleted or keep track of them. And I'm gonna create a new set here of type number, deleted IDs. And what we can also do is then add every selected ID to the set. And if we go ahead here, I'm going to delete 6, 7, 10, 11, 12, delete rows. These are gone and are saved in a set. Great. So coming now to the interesting part, we want to, of course, write the data or write the changes to the database. And this is getting more complicated now, of course. But let's start simple by just adding the save button. So let me find it. Here it is. And so just a small save changes button. This time it's primary, so it looks it stands a bit out. And we again have to add handle save here. And so how do we want to do it? We want to call an API this time. And first let's get all the data from the rows. And I loop through the grid options API each node. Unfortunately, I haven't found a better way to do this. I have to do the loop, I guess, because here grid options.grid data or something, data, row data, I guess, does not include the new rows. I don't know why, but I think it's only the initial rows. So I did it this way. If you have a better solution, please comment that in the put that in the comments. And so we have now the rows. What we also want to do is I have to disable the Copilot again. We want to get the deleted IDs. And we want to pass the rows. Can of course log what we're doing here and simply test it out. So let's open the console and add a row and change this, delete this row, save changes, and we get the deleted number 9, get our new row here and our updated row here. Great. So let's go back. And next, we want to do an actual call of the API. Of course, haven't implemented it yet, but we will do later. And we fetch it with async, so need to add it to the function. And I think it's best to pass the album ID. So we need the current album ID to know which album to update. Or especially if we insert a new record, to which album we must add it to. And then we say, I think post makes the most sense, because we do all to delete, insert, and update. Let's say we have a content type of JSON, and of course we need to put the body in there. Great. And if the result is okay, we can reload to fetch the data from the database again. And else we set error to true. Error, we need to define that. That's just a small variable. And what we can do with that is we can go ahead, below the buttons here, and we can add a small div notification is danger that says we have some error saving changes. Okay, great. This is it for calling the API, but I made a small mistake before, and we need to fix that. And it's especially only for my use case a mistake. So in the handle add row, so if we create a new row, we set here the track ID to the max ID +1, and this works very well if we for our page or for only the data on our page. So these tracks, but unfortunately we have of course multiple albums in our database, and we see on multiple tracks from multiple albums, and we of course only see the tracks for this album. And if I add a row, number 15 could have been taken by another album. So I decided to do another workaround. First, we store how many new rows we have, and always add to that if we get a new row. And to know that it's a new track, let's do it negative. So every track ID is below the 0 in the backend. We can say, yeah, please auto-generate ID in the database. And because we reload after sending our post message, we then get the right database ID after the reload. Okay, great. So let's go ahead and go to our, let's create the API endpoint. So API album ID handle track grid, new folder, it's called album ID, and in there we can do that. We add a file plus server.ts, and we go in there, and we start off with a post function that satisfies request handler. Yes, great. And again, we should always do our admin check. Only do this if we are admin. First thing, always check it and throw an error. Then we are safe. And then we have to check if we get an album ID. And we have to parse it as a number. And then we can go ahead and grab the request body, so the JSON of the request, and let's add to that data the album ID. So we have everything we need in that data thing. And now we need to call the database function that does the save. So let's do that. First actually define the type. So what we will get in this function is the deleted IDs, so number array, the rows, they're of our database type album track. So same that get fetched when we load the page. Of course, the same data structure gets returned when we save. And the album ID, so we know if we insert a new album, to which one we assign it. And let's go to our database functions in here. And this is now, it gets complicated. This is the biggest function here. And we go in there. Why is Copilot again doing something? So let's start off. And thing is, what we did with the genres is we only have the text here. We don't have the ID of the genre, but we need of course to save the ID because it's normalized the schema. So in the tracks table we need to store the genre ID. To do that, we first get the genres, use the same function we defined before, and what we can do now is we loop over all the rows. So the data again gets deleted rows and album ID. Let's first actually check if we have any rows. So let's do that, and in there we can then get the genre ID. So we say genre is find, and genre name equals track.genre. And then we can return our new object. So we map this, that's why I return a new object. And note that I specified everything here and didn't use the spread operator because, I mean, there could be a chance that some of these are not filled, and then SQLite would complain. But if some of these are null, as composer it can be null in the database, now we just get in the object really the composer property, but with a null value. So now that's done. Now I'm gonna paste a huge SQL. So instead of course I skipped this part, sorry. This is the part where I checked if the track ID is bigger than null, we use it, otherwise we set it to null. So the new created rows, they are smaller than 0 and they get set to null. And then the database automatically checks or automatically gets a sequence ID for it. Okay, sorry, back to the merge SQL. We first do the insert part, all the fields, and on conflict, so it's an upsert or merge kind of thing. So basically it first tries to update if there's already one with a track ID. We want to update this, so on conflict on the track ID, do an update and update the fields basically. And then we can prepare the statement and in the end actually run it. But here we can use spread to fill the track values and add the album ID, because only on the insert we need it, not on the update. We can't change the album from our grid. Okay, this is the part that does the merge of the data, but what's with the deletion part? So let's add it on the top here. Again, check if there are actually deleted records. And this is fairly simple now. Delete SQL, prepare it, and for each ID, run it and pass the ID. Yeah, that's it for this function. Basically processes our grid data. Now we can go back to our API route and we need to call it, of course. I would do it in a try catch because we didn't catch any error in this database function. Call save grid tracks and then the data as tracks grid save data. And if we're fine, we can return JSON. Says anything. I think we don't actually need JSON, but I don't care for now. Could also return anything, any string. Catch our error. Console.log. Oh, I'm gonna copy that. Error saving tracks, and throw also an error 500 error saving grid tracks. So back in our page, we said if res okay, this doesn't go on this can be anything, it can be success or something, but it just checks if the status code is okay, and it's okay if we return a JSON. So basically if there's no error code, return from the request. Otherwise we set error to true. And also I think we should should not really pass this error information. This could be sensible. Just say, yeah, there was an error saving the data. Of course, if there is some not null constraints we should catch them here and give a better error message. But I don't think it's the best to put the database error message to the user on the front. So, oops, okay. Now we can test it, can we? Yeah, we can. And let's first start with a new row. Here we have -1, new row, new track, and let's say sometime hello, and it's hip hop rap. Save changes, and we did a reload, and yeah, we have a new ID, 3500, and basically all is saved. Okay, let's run into an error. So go here, tests, and duration is a field that must be submitted. So on saving, we get this internal server error. And if we look at the terminal, it says not null constraint failed, tracks.milliseconds. So what we can do is say, add something here, save again, and we reload. Oh, think there's a bug. So test. Why doesn't that work? Track ID should have worked. Does it only work if we do full? Haha, I know what's the problem. So, okay. It's not, this makes sense. If we go to the database function and we get to the actual query that fills this grid, album track, get album tracks here, we do a full join, but we haven't filled out a genre for the things. So save that, and if we do reload, here are our missing tracks. Good thing I had noticed and remembered that we didn't a full join there. Okay, so inserting and errors do work. So let's do delete. So 05 and 06, delete, and of course save, and they're gone. Update. This is now a TV show. Save. Et voila. Great. So we're basically done. We have made this, implemented this AG grid and allowed to offer a spreadsheet-like editing experience in Svelte Kit. Hooray! Thanks for tuning in. If you have some questions or feedback, please let me know in the comments, and I hope that you like the tutorial. Goodbye.